results were not there, or should I say there were a lot of results, right? But never really to the level of my ambition, right? And so what really I was seeking for when we started our conversations and our work together was to move and improve the performance of the team on us working collectively towards that vision. It was always about, bulldozing through challenges, right? Spending more time and more energy, and more intensity on solving a problem, right? My team was not reaching the result I wanted. I was asking everybody, and myself included, to put on more work, put on more time. Essentially, I realized that not only was I not having solutions, but also I realized that I was draining myself. I was also running out of energy, right?
Welcome back to another episode of External Leadership Podcast. I'm Dagmara Asbreuk, founder of External Leadership and partner to progressive and impact-driven CEOs and executives who want to make a difference, who want to grow exponentially their leadership, their career, organizations, and businesses. And I have a pleasure in this episode to talk to one of those leaders who I had a pleasure also to work with, Florent Couturier, who went through a journey that can be called as really truly extraordinary, coming with having challenges in developing his team to really high performing, towards now shaping his legacy and moving to Silicon Valley. And so I'm very, very grateful that he decided actually to come to this show and also share it. And of course, what went in that couple of months working together and what helped him to be where he is today. So, Florent, very excited to have you here in the studio and, of course, unpack for the listeners, for the audience, your journey and your shifts and your evolution. Welcome.
Absolutely, Dagmara. Thank you very much for that. I'm also very excited. And I'm the one to be grateful, actually, because indeed those last months have been nothing short of extraordinary for me. And it's really because of our collaboration, right, on that side. And I'm so happy now I can share because the impact on me was really transformational.
Thank you very much. And, pleasure always to work with like-minded, driven, and meaningful impact seekers like yourself. So thank you very much for allowing me that. So Florent, let's start with the beginning. Let's go back, to this moment where you decided like, okay, I think I would benefit to having someone help me here, maybe a coach or I don't know, what were your thoughts that time? So take us back and share where you were and what, motivated you to look for an executive coach.
Absolutely. Maybe a little bit of background about myself. As a kid, essentially, I wanted to step out from a very small town where I grew up, and my way to escape was to play piano. So essentially, and that was essentially starting the first part of my career, but as many of us, career is nothing from linear, right? I mean, so as much as a kid, you might have big ambitions and big dreams, right? Then obviously, sometime life has essentially ways for you to realize there's need for shifts. And that I guess something we'll discuss as well. But my first shift actually was when I realized I will not do a piano career on that side and I had to do something different. And then I went on studying computer science, realized very quickly this won't be a career for me, neither as a developer nor as someone managing systems. Went to Southeast Asia, where I had a wonderful life until I realized that while I was seeking for big impact, essentially as much as my life there was fantastic, I will probably not be able to realize that impact I was seeking for. And went back to Europe, where I started a second part of career in the financial services industry in a German, essentially, investment fund, buying and investing into private companies, specifically in the technology sector. And we met once I was already a bit short of 10 years in my essentially trajectory within that firm. And I had moved, as it's very common, from individual contributor to a team leader, setting actually a new practice. 2 years before we met, was trusted to by our CEO to launch our flagship fund of 2 billions and essentially build a team and a practice around that. That was a very new experience to me. And obviously I wanted to do the things the very right way. And I went from what I believed was textbook leadership, right? I mean, on that side, setting a big vision for the team, making sure that vision was communicating, breaking down that vision into quarterly goals and milestones, making sure those were very clear for the team, and then being a good servant or empower or somebody to empower essentially the team, have them essentially working through and progressing autonomously, right, towards working on our quarterly goals, right? And despite applying what I believe to be everything right in textbook leadership, as many could expect, results were not there, or should I say there were a lot of results, right? But never really to the level of my ambition, right? Essentially for on that side. And so what really I was seeking for when we started to our conversations and our work together was to move and improve the performance of the team on us working collectively towards that vision. So that's essentially when we met.
Thank you very much for adding on, about your background, context, and it's always interesting to, hear you sharing this intercultural background and experiences that shape also who you are and how you lead. And yeah, that allowed you to also experience different contexts, right? And I love how you mentioned, I did everything right from the textbook because there are so many books, so many theories, right? And good suggestions. I'm not saying that. But then we come to this moment of something is not there. And I remember also, I think you shared with me that, and that's so common that time. It's like, there can be more, right? There is something that doesn't click, something is off, right? So, what made you in this moment where you notice, okay, you mentioned the results were there, but not to my ambition. So, what then made you actually choose to look for an external support or support by a coach? Because, from there onwards, there can be many different pathways.
Absolutely. I was seeing myself in that journey that I had had for short of 10 years in the same company as paved by a lot of success, right? And obviously, once we've been essentially walking through a path that has been paved from success, or at least that we perceive to be like that, we ended up thinking that we, we know it all. And when we don't know it, right? I mean, ultimately, we'll figure out a solution by ourselves. Quite frankly, that arrogance, was definitely where I started, right? I mean, and so I was like, look, my team is not getting where I want them to be. Uh, so let me try to find out solution from myself, right? And
So
after,
maybe when we pause there, Florent, let's pause there because that's such an important moment that you're unpacking for so many, leaders. What are the things that you tried before you then decided maybe for something else?
yes, and you're asking a very important and profound question. And to give one word of context, let me try to unpack how I think that I was able to get there in the first place, right? I mean, because I think it's important for that. I was profoundly in the state of mind when I started that finance career that it was a second chance for me, right? I mean, and life was giving me, a second chance to get started into something. And I wanted to make sure I made the most out of it and that I made my success in that second career path essentially something inevitable. And I did it in what we need to unpack much more, but in a way that was leading essentially to myself trying a lot of things by myself, which is I tried to find inspiration in others of what it means to be successful in my career path, right? I was like, I will make it. And to make it, I'm ready to do anything, that is required to be successful. And my view, essentially, when started was that, okay, I'll identify people that are successful in that essentially career path and I will seek inspiration and I will seek to transform myself to essentially become like them, right? I mean, to essentially emulate and mimic success, right? On that side. And so every time was facing challenge during those 7 years and essentially the time where my team was not performing was nothing short. I essentially did what I always did, which was fueling myself deeply, right? I mean, into those narratives and the way I was essentially seeing others transforming. And in my industry, which is still a very, I would say, old school industry, not just in my company, really in the industry overall, It was always about, bulldozing through, as I would say, right? Essentially challenges, right? I mean, and bulldozing through challenging could be spending more time and more energy, and more intensity on solving a problem, right? And so that was the first way. So for instance, if my team was essentially not reaching the result I wanted, I was asking everybody, and myself included, to put on more work, put on more time, very classically, try to work on more projects at the same time, try to essentially spend more time together, multiplying essentially work time, team building times, at the same time. And so that was essentially my first reflex, right? I mean, putting more intensity into my second reflex was that moving from a mode where I was giving a lot of autonomy to team members, where in a mode where I would essentially come much more hands-on and have more control, right? I mean, not in a sense of limiting essentially their ability, but more in the sense of showing the way, right? I mean, essentially on that side, right? And showing the way the same way I had seen successful leaders in my industry, doing it, right? And after trying that also for months, essentially I realized that not only was I not having solutions by continuing to apply essentially the same recipe for success that I had applied before, fueling myself from examples of others, but also I realized that it's not just that I was not getting more success and results from the team. It's also that I was draining myself much more, right? Essentially, and not just was I essentially running short of recourse, right? I mean, of increasing impact of my team, but I was also running out of energy, right? I mean, for myself to essentially find new solution to our challenges, especially given that I had both. Obviously, as it's very common to make sure we were working towards our goal, but also handling internal politics within our organization, which is common and exists everywhere, right? And so that was a point of time where I was like, okay, I know for sure I can do it for myself, but I'm getting to the point of time where I'm not finding it. I need to find essentially the solutions, and I'm not in a state that trying, for 3 months or 6 months again by myself will essentially bring something more will bring me closer to the solution for essentially performance improvement goals. And it's time that I try to find essentially someone to work that with. And my very first approach was to essentially research on LinkedIn for coaches. And I resonated so well with the content you share online that I thought about approaching.
Thank you. That's important, right? The resonance with the person that you always have to be supported by. And I absolutely like how you mentioned, how you went into what a lot of leaders would still consider as that's the way. And I was there myself too. So I'm listening to your story. I kind of remind myself also certain episodes in my life where exactly the same formula I followed, right? The let's work harder, let's do more. And this dynamic of you need more autonomy, right? But then still that doesn't work, right? Because still something is. So it's just this balance between being close and being too far. Is it controlling? Is it micromanaging? Or is it basically empowering? And all of these inner dilemmas. Have you felt in those moments doubts about yourself?
Well, for sure, because ultimately, after 7 years of things never go fully your way, right? I mean, but 7 years where things were going essentially broadly my way, and where even when I was facing challenges, I was always having a solution, essentially. That was really the first point of time where I was like, I'm potentially even running out of solution myself, right? And that is obviously a very tough moment, right? I mean, to a certain degree, because that feeling of not being in control anymore, or not being able to achieve things the way you want, right? I mean, for anyone that is seeking high performance is not a good feeling. But at the same time, it felt like a relief as well, in the sense of, and maybe it was a start of the transformation already, but in the sense of, it's okay, it's as much as it's hurting, it's okay. Most important is there's a solution of the problem out there, and the goal should be to seek for that solution, essentially, and realizing that no matter essentially past achievements or future achievements, we are all humans, right? Essentially, on that side, and fundamentally that rather than having to rely on you alone, you can essentially create essentially your condition for success by also partnering with others, right?
Yeah.
And so, and as much as it serves, it starts shifting perspectives, and that shifting of perspective is a relief, right?
Yeah, when I hear it, then I think it's important to mention that now looking back, you probably see it the same. Of course, it was the moment inviting you to. There's moments when we are like without the solution, we can call it stuck, stagnant. There are so many definitions, doubtful, right? Like we
Yeah.
try all the things we already know, and we're still in the same place where we've been a couple of months before. Now, what do we do next, right? And it happens in so many different occasions, right? And the way I look at those things, and I think you probably see them same now, but many don't realize that. Okay, it's actually such a beautiful invitation to go deeper, invitation to let yourself given access. Actually, that's what I like to name it is, and given access to something that you have not had an access before, and something that is deeper, that is more powerful, that is within your potential, and all of that. And that is what is usually how it comes, right? It needs to be painful. Otherwise, we're not going to look for those transformational partners, strategic partners, however you want to call it, for others, basically, that bring that access, bring that expertise, bring that lens, right? And have an ability to support. And I think the second is what you mentioned is the moment of acceptance. In order to do that, in order to reach out or even consider, yes, it's like taking conscious decision in your mind. I want someone. I want someone to walk with me. I want someone to partner here with me. Not because I'm weak, but because I deserve it, because I know that that's actually, will go to get me faster somewhere, right? Because that's what at the end any high performing, ambitious leader look for. How can I get there faster, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it's such an important that you mentioned that because the acceptance play an important role. The moment we have not accepted that, okay, you know what? I've tried in my own awareness that I'm having and, resources that I'm having and ideas that I'm having. Now I think I'm exhausted them. I need a new perspective. That's acceptance. And that's the moment of decision, which then started to shift everything because I think somehow we very fast met. That's how universe bring us together, right? The moment we decide, that's why I slow that speed because that's such important awareness. Okay, good. So now we are a couple of months after, I think precisely we worked together for 9 months or something like that, right? Tell me first, where are you now? And then we'll unpack the journey because that might be interesting to hear. Where are you now? Because we know now where you were, but let's really make it clear where you actually now.
So, and that's to show profound and transformational our journey together went. I was essentially building an investment fund internally in a firm in which I had been essentially for 10 years. Not only did I made the bold decision to leave that firm, but I went on an entrepreneurial journey, and a journey that actually might not just be a lateral movement, from, being into a corporate, into launching the same activity, essentially a fund by my own, but a journey of actually essentially being an entrepreneur and launching a business in one of the domain that I had been exploring essentially through my career, and where essentially, having had the time, mental bandwidth, and ease and flow to explore essentially those path of opportunities I have been completely called into. I think essentially has been a complete realignment with myself, and it's very important, and we will need to discuss about that. And now, essentially, it's not just essentially that I have the idea that I'm launching, but I have also a lot of clarity on the path, essentially to go there. And the path has me leaving from Germany to actually moving to where the talent for launching my business is, which is in the Silicon Valley on the US West Coast. I'm finalizing essentially the trip to found the co-founders there, launch the business, start working with our first customers, and before actually coming back to Europe, that business will have two legs essentially between the US and between Europe, where obviously I made most of my career. So that journey has definitely many layers of transformation. But if I need to call it two, was taking the bold step, not just to moving essentially from corporate, but actually to being an entrepreneur, taking the bold step of moving from being a so-called generalist investors into someone that will dedicate essentially many years to one single topic that is really driving, and taking the bold step also to travel the world and go essentially where the ambition is driving me, to find the right ecosystem and talent pool to work towards that vision that start essentially materializing in front of me.
Yes, and it's amazing and has been amazing to watch, how it all unfolded. And of course, the energy that has been growing and passion and clarity you mentioned and the drive. And when you just were mentioning, I was just counting how many transitions you went through, right? Transition from a corporate leader to a business owner, right? That's a big transition to embrace. So many new questions and clarity on the path you mentioned. Yeah, that's kind of the first thing. The second, I know that you've been successful very early on to creating clients just after jumping, which is amazing, right? So that's transition. How do I now actually create clients? Actually, how do I serve and how do I make an impact, right, in this new fashion? And the third is you transition indeed. You went from Germany to France, and now you're moving to Silicon Valley, and that's enough. That's a geographic transition again. And I think the fourth one, because that's what you're doing now, is even going to US to actually develop that business there. So that's another kind of transition, right? You don't do it in your own, let me say, hometown or culture that you know, but you do it out. And I think there is a fifth one. This is a territory that is new for you, isn't it?
Yes.
There is, of course, that you're building up with your expertise, but there is some newness as well, right, in the industry for you.
Of course,
Yeah.
100%. No, as you said, there's really those fifth transition at the very least, and they've been all massive and unfolding. But actually, the first shift is the one that retrospectively took the longest, right? I mean, because that were the more transformational and core ones. But when essentially together, right? I mean, for our partnership, we got to that first milestone, which was okay. No, actually, the right step is essentially after we've done already so much transformation is to leave a corporate career with the right essentially vision and with or at least spark of a vision, I would call it, right, on that side, and with the right attitude and way to think about energy, then actually everything that you mentioned that came after that felt very natural and felt with very inevitable, right, on that side. Yes, it was very challenging and maybe a little bit crazy to think that I would just leave and try to figure out, because when I left my corporate career, I had no idea whatsoever on the kind of business I would like to launch. Right? I had a lot of clarity that it was the right way, and it was the thing that felt the most natural at that point of time. But it was a lot of trust on things that were nothing close to essentially concrete, right? And then it was a lot of trying, but trying with the right energy landed immediately, as you mentioned, a lot of opportunities where I had immediately, just by essentially discussing about the topics that were driving me, found immediately, and the offer of services I could provide immediately to find free customers, right, on that side. And I'm so grateful for my partnership with my customers as well, because together with my partnership with you, they've been really transformational. Or at least those partnerships have not been transformational, but they've been with customers, but they've been more helping me also progress very fast on clarity towards essentially where business opportunity lies, right? Ultimately. And I guess that that's where the transformation we went through together has been very powerful. A, because when the opportunity materialized, I was able to see it with great clarity very quickly. And I didn't procrastinate so much about going to the opportunity because I had already built a lot of trust, essentially,
Mm.
in the flow and in the energy. And really, when we are talking about transformation, that's been for sure the biggest transformation you've been unlocking in me, is moving from that place that we've been describing, right? I mean, where I was, which was fundamentally a place of control, essentially, to a place of trust. That's what's unlocking all of essentially the concrete steps that we are mentioning, right? I mean, because then when essentially the opportunity of launching my business, which is in low latency networking, essentially materialized, as soon as I realized that there was something there, I didn't wait for a second, right? I mean, directly moving forward at exploring full speed, right? I mean, and committing, right? I mean, and very obviously testing several intuitions, right? I mean, what kind of business model should I launch, right? I mean, should I launch more of a product software business model? Should I launch it as essentially an operator of networks? Should I launch it as someone servicing customers, right? And helping them to essentially operate those networks by themselves? Should I be building hardware, essentially, that are supporting the flow of traffic in that network? But those essentially questions, which are very natural, I want in exploring them with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, right? I mean, and excitement, right? On that side. And ultimately, it was very clear also that I will not find all of the answers in Europe because for the type of technologies I'm working on, it became very apparent in the very early days that you have 6 companies, out of which 3 are based in the Silicon Valley, 2 are based in Seattle, maybe 1 is based in the US East Coast. And that to progress faster, essentially building a business in the space, there was no way around than being there with the people we are essentially operating those networks, being there with the people that are architecting those networks, being there with the people that have already scarf tissues, right? I mean, in that specific industry. And when essentially that realization was there, it has been also shaping essentially the way I want to construct the business, right? There could have been many opportunities, but what I decided is all of that greatness that is concentrated in a few miles on the west coast of the Silicon Valley will very soon benefit to many other areas of the world. And actually, it's a mission on which I want to embark on to make sure that ultimately that very specific cutting edge knowledge now is used to train people and to spread it, essentially, starting with Europe, where obviously I have most of my business contacts and network. But very soon, I guess, will take me also to other part of the world, right? I mean, that's always how I have envisioned building a business that is rich of connecting many different worlds, many different dots, essentially on that side, and is what even I consider the recipe of success, right? That network effects that give access to knowledge, talent, and ideas, partners, and resources as broad as possible to continue to grow.
Oh, that's amazing. You're talking about something that you're passionate about. That's your mission, right? So we love to share more. And also, I was listening to you and thinking, yeah, there were a couple of courageous moments in this path,
Yeah.
which you needed to take, the courageous moments, and decisions, right? Decision to step out of a corporate and follow the intuition, as you mentioned, right? And trust that intuition into, okay, that's my mission. That's what I want to do. And it was, it was actually not so difficult because of the work we've been doing. We'll go back to that. And also the second was now what you're doing is you're taking action fast. And there is a saying that universe likes speed. And that's really true because basically the courage, the taking actions, taking risks to some extent, right? Giving yourself fully in. That's what you're doing now. And what you mentioned, that requires a deeper level of trust within yourself, to that vision, to that mission, to that intelligence that is kind of bit guiding you along the journey. And also the third, what I'm hearing, what you're sharing is the synchronicities, right? The speed that certain things were coming into life, which happens when we are in aligned, embodied states, we can say, right? That's where the flow, you mentioned that terminology, right? The flow, we experience flow, first of all, right? And that's where we enter into quantum co creation, we can say. But that many buzzwords there, it might be still buzzwords for many people. So I was just wondering if we could little go one layer deeper and walking through this journey of this 9 months. What were the shifts? What were the realizations? What were the things
Yeah.
that helped you actually to come where you're now? Because essentially that was a journey of quantum leaping, we call it, or exponentially growing. So 10x, not 2x. It is a journey definitely of identity shifting, which is kind of a base, and obviously of energetic alignments. And there are some things that need to happen so that we succeed here. So walk us through from your own lens, right?
Yes,
How it
absolutely.
was.
And you're very right that ultimately it's identity shift. But I remember that when we started our conversation, I was worried about identity shift because I was, to come back to what we mentioned at the beginning, was perceiving myself on a pathway of success. And I wanted to improve, but I wanted to make sure I was not changing anything that was essentially making me successful, right? And actually, you've been fantastic at very quickly working through passing through bias I had, essentially, on that and guiding me through the journey. And I think where you've been doing wonders is helping me realize very quickly that, first of all, that I had built a lot of mechanisms which I thought were key to my success, and that were actually preventing me, right, from being successful. So whatever the terminology and how we want to call it, whether it's saboteurs or etc. But it's essentially,
Autopilot, right? We can also call it, for those that don't know the word saboteur, is like the autopilot, right? We were first discovering what's the autopilot, right? Which is subconsciously
yeah,
programmed in our bodies, right? And as you mentioned on a easiest level, right, is the patterns, how you actually were leading, right? That was driving your leadership behaviors and thinking.
absolutely. And that was for sure the first shift, because once we
Mm.
identify and we essentially decide to shift essentially those autopilots, right? I mean, where we are not taking
Mhm.
actual decisions, but we are driven essentially by we essentially driven by our mind instead of driving our mind, right? On that side. Is the first and immediate reaction that showed me, oh, I was very convinced already, but that showed me our work was done was every time I was doing that, my colleagues were saying that I was transformed, that I was much more, chill, that I was much more, that I felt much more relaxed, that I felt much more, at ease with all of the challenges that were happening in work. Well, that was a very first transformation, right? I mean, realizing that there's something essentially, some situations that needs to be handled differently, and some of my reaction that can be essentially different in one-to-one interactions at work or collective interaction at work is the first step of transformation. But the bigger step is to come back to what we mentioned at the beginning. My profound belief was that I had to, I was getting into our collaboration to improve results and performance of the team. Was essentially trying to find new steps into the textbook to get there. And obviously, it was not about finding new step into the textbook. It was about realizing. And the profound realization you guided me through is that, and I verbalized it relatively quickly, I think, was that the way I was describing it was, I feel disconnect. There's a disconnect between me and the team, right? I set the vision, I communicate the vision, and still there is a disconnect between me and the team. So what am I doing wrong, right? Why is that disconnect happening? And the more you and I we've been working together, I realized that the disconnect was actually not between me and the team. It was between me, the version essentially of me that was setting the vision, and myself. Um,
That's profound realization, disconnection, which is an eye opener, right?
yes,
Mm.
absolutely.
This is the moment, by the way, for the audience as well. Just to add on what I'm hearing is also that's the moment where we realize, oh, these patterns created that version of me, right? I thought that's who I am, right? That's my personality, we call it as well. And that's also the right way to do versus when we start to notice, no, that's just a protection mechanism we're running, right? And I don't know, there are many differences. You see saboteurs depending on which framework we use, but we are used to using the terminology of saboteurs for mental fitness. So yes, the tendency of pleasing, hyper performing, or performing in order to be valued, things like that, right? Avoiding, maybe controlling. Those are different mechanisms we run. The moment we kind of take that veil off, that the realization which landed for you, right? Oh, there is a different part of me, right?
Absolutely. And to also explain it to our listeners, as I had mentioned, I came into that finance career with the thought that in order to succeed, my key condition to success was to emulate success of others. And it starts from a very good intention, right? I mean, at the beginning, because obviously we want to set ourselves the condition for success. And the shortcut, at least the way it seems, right? I mean, is to tune ourselves, right? I mean, into a vision. But in that case, it was a vision from others, right? I mean, ultimately. And the more time goes, right? I mean, the more actually we start drifting, essentially drifting from leading from who we are, from leading from what we perceived to be essential and goal, right, on that side. And where I was sitting at that point of time was that I had drifted so much, essentially, from who I am, essentially, and what my values are, because I thought and I made that conscious decision, essentially, that no matter how hard it could be, I could become whatever is required, right? I mean, to be successful through sheer willpower. Essentially, on
Mm.
that side, I could transform myself to be that other leader that is sitting somewhere else on that side and walk through that journey of success, get those characteristics that are not in my soul, that are not essentially in my inner being, but that are my condition to success. And frankly, I've been nurturing that negative loop, right? I mean, because obviously at the beginning it yielded. We must recognize, right? I mean, that essentially where we are is the result of the action we take. And for a good number of years, it had led me to progress very fast internally, to be given more and more responsibility. That was definitely what I thought to be my recipe of success. What you helped me realize, and that was so profound and so emotional to me, was that actually by doing so, I had been drifting so much that I had completely lost a view of my essence, right? I mean, and I had almost become somebody else, right, in order to be successful. So that realization at the beginning was very I remember crying essentially when I realized I had given as I was verbalizing it so much on my, and that was the reason why essentially no I was not getting the result I wanted from my team, because fundamentally I was not leading from a place of authenticity, right?
Mm.
Essentially.
And maybe I will pause here because it's such a profound, I think, moment in your journey and in journey of any of leaders that actually go through this process. And definitely, it has been profound realization for myself in the past too. It is, as you say, emotional. It is like realizing that, oh, I don't need to look up for others and other frameworks and other people how they build success because they will never work for you. First of all, yes, there are some parts which will, and some parts which is good to inspire yourself with. But as you said, you distance yourself from the authenticity and from the power that actually you has and the uniqueness. And as in your journey, as in many others, I think this feeling is like relief to some extent. I think maybe you mentioned that word as well, but it's like, you feel like some armor. For me, it was in the past, like an armor is going down, like the guard you can get down, and you can finally feel lighter as well and more connected. And also to this point that you mentioned, I think, yes, so many of us first actually do create some level of success with living on this autopilot shaped by the past and all of that. Of course, most of us were completely unaware about that. I was there for over 30 years myself. And then they come the moment of invitation, right? That's the moment where, and these invitations, by the way, will always repeat because that's the purpose of a human evolution that we have here on earth is actually to grow. And so these invitations and the pain of this invitation will increase until you kind of pick up this call to discover that what you're just discussing actually. So yes, that's also interesting to understand because you call it also so beautifully willpower. Yes, this is creating success by giving a lot of energy, by doing more. Exactly what you described before. This is the willpower, the drive, the hard work. And it's still dominating belief when we think about the corporate world and the world itself, still the dominating belief of that's how we can, that's the only way to create success, right? That's the only way organization, leaders, businesses can succeed. And kind of this journey like this one, and obviously peers in my place, I mean, we're working towards helping to see the world and helping the leaders like yourself, like to see, there is another way, actually, even a better way. So let us continue your story to end the narrative.
And you're very right, actually, that the moment where we realize that essentially that was not something that was actually something that was ending the team from working on their goals, started a phase of transformation, essentially, but realignment with the goal of improving the performance of the team. To make really transparent here on other process ones, it feels when you've been working on autopilot for many years, it feels very uncomfortable at the beginning to trust, right? That essentially there's a different way to do things, and that if you've been successful by having a lot of control over things, and by essentially projecting yourself into other, into success from others to shape your own success, it's very difficult to believe that by flipping complete essentially those hypotheses and starting leading from an authentic place, you'll get actually a better result, right? So that was a scary thing for me to shift, but I did it because the reason why I did it and embraced it really is as that was the answer. I was running out of answers essentially at that time and running out of energy because I had drifted too far, right? I mean, the fact of realigning myself was giving me that energy back, right? I mean, so no matter how scary it might be for me to flip the plate on that side, at least I was just caught essentially by that energy, right? On essentially leading from them. Very concretely, what does that mean? When you rediscover yourself, your essence, or however we want to call it, and from the place, I would call it the place from where you can lead by big attempt on that side. The second big step was to rethink completely how I was building vision, and you've been instrumental for me. Because obviously, as leader, we are all used to set a vision, right? I mean, set a vision is such an important thing, right? But the place from which you set that vision matters a lot, right? In the energy and intensity of that vision. And setting a vision mechanically is very different from setting a vision that is animated. And to set a vision that is animated and that can carry other vision, you need to build a vision muscle. And I remember because I had drifted so from my inner self, it was at the beginning very difficult for me. I was able to set a vision for the team. I was unable to set a vision for myself, which is impossible when you think about it, right? I mean, on that side, I was spending day and night telling the team we want to build 20 billion, 40 billion investment fund, one of the most successful investment practice in the world. But then, as soon as somebody was asking me, and Flo, and you, where do you see yourself? I was unable to do so because I had been so much driving myself by projecting essentially the characteristic of what I need to be successful that I had completely not trained my vision muscle. And what we've been essentially doing together is rebuild that vision muscle so that essentially I could have a vision for myself. And what was different essentially was instead of having a vision that is very picture perfect in the sense of very cinematic and very disconnected from myself. Because I was building that vision from a space essentially aligned with myself, that vision became grounded. And the fact that that vision became grounded was crucial to make the bigger transformation, which is moving from a place where I feel there's energy there and I want to go there because there's energy, to know I have a vision. I know the energy as a form, right? And I can move from a place where I trust because I feel it to a place where I've built trust. I've built trust. I've built trust that there's that the vision is inevitable because it's essentially, and that therefore I can shift my way of operating, and not just of leading, but really on operating, shifting from trying to control everything to trusting the flow. And that's where essentially we're able as leader to move from a place which feels uncomfortable, where we are essentially always forcing our way through and controlling things, that place of control where we are trying to read an abstract, essentially, picture of what success might look like, from a place where we are trusting, essentially, the flow and the energy of a vision, and where things happens to with ease, without effort, right? I mean, on that side, without us having to control every steps on the way, that trust is actually the fuel, right? I mean, that we are using on a day to day to using to progress with the business. And it would have been impossible, but and I'm still working through those transformations, but that trust is the ultimate ingredient that allows to let go of things, right? And when I say it's brilliant, when we understand that control is not essentially the right mechanism for us to succeed, it's easy to think, let's start to let go more, right? I mean, let's shift and let's start to let go more. But if we don't have the trust, and if we don't invest into strengthening that in what's coming and what we're calling in more every day, then ultimately it becomes impossible to let go for things that we really care about. And when we succeed to get into that place, that no matter which state we reach and whether we are able to lead by ease and flow, there will always be hurdles on the way. There will always be challenges and hardship to face. But when we get to the point when, even when we care so much about it, right? There's still things going on our ways, still things not happening the way we would like them to happen. We are able to let of all of that because of.
Such an important share what you're just mentioning, because there are a couple of things that are so important to, I think, reiterate in what you were just sharing. So that from the moment of realization, okay, there is a different part of me that feels more authentic, that not only looks like, but it is felt experience, right? And that feels right. Yeah, that feels this is it. From that moment to really fully embody, as I call it, right? That version of yourself. And even, first starts to understand what that version of me wants. What's the vision here? And how do I execute that vision, right? That's another thing. What needs to happen is this process of letting go, as you say, because it's identity shifting, right? And what you're saying is so important is trusting that. And I think in this moment in our process, right? And the process that you went, connecting with a part, right, of yourself, your inner self, right? Discovering who that version of you is and painting that vision not only from your mind, but from an aligned state, from the heart, from field experience, through those different exercises, right? That brings us to embodied, how we call it, embodied experience. We start to that vision, that clarity, and the embodiment process itself, with a lot of energetics behind, obviously, is how you are rewiring that identity, how you're shifting, right? And that's what is building basically this trust. Because I like what you mentioned, that this trust is essential. Now, listening to you, I thought, yes, of course. And another thing what happens is, our mind and body love familiarity, right? Familiarity equals safety. And this is why we struggle with change, because any change, right? But especially the change that we need to embrace in many different forms or shapes, right? Just because our mind and body subconsciously doesn't want to go there because it's unfamiliar. So without that process, it's just a cognitive wish. And you've been doing that too, right? Before. It's like creating this vision,
Yeah.
creating that goal, but not upgrading yourself from inside out to support it. And it's impossible to lead any transformational change either in your organization or through your own business if you don't elevate you, right? Because it's like wishing for this and having all the time the autopilot and the whole system within pulling you down and sabotaging you, right? And that's kind of what is needs to happen. Now, in this journey, you mentioned that word very, very often energy. And I think that's important that we also, as a last part of this thing, elaborate a little bit more about this energy. And you mentioned ease and flow, because I think from my perspective into all of this work, one thing is about stepping into authentic self, and of course values are important, another thing. But another thing and another game, another level is energy. For me, it's in another level of embodiment. That's really embodiment, embodied experience as well. And then we talk about ease and flow. So how would you describe that part to listeners who maybe have not heard yet about that? How would you say it in your own words, your own experience?
The word I would for that would be a sense of alignment with the universe, right? I mean, not a self of alignment with oneself, alignment with everything that, and just to tie it back to the identity part that we mentioned right before. All of us have experienced those moments, right? I mean, of alignment with the universe, right? I mean, to a greater or less extent, very intense or less. But the state of ease and flow is to be able to maintain essentially over a long period, right? It's impossible to get into that state of alignment with the universe if, on one side, unaware, right, who we are, and so it's to be aligned with the universe. There's a need of having an awareness and a grounded, essentially identity, and building that vision, stepping into that vision more and more, calling it, first making it clear, and that's why we work through activations, right? And then essentially having the two fueling each other, essentially the identity fueling the vision, right? And at that point of time, it does not create yet alignment with the universe. It creates alignment internally. It doesn't create alignment with the universe, right? But that's a very good condition to actually being fully open to what the universe has to offer to us, right? And that third step, essentially, which is then going out, an aligned place internally, right, into exploring into the universe, what is out there, has helped me essentially to figure out what will be the business I will be launching. So just to reiterate for our listeners the steps, we've been working together on essentially realigning myself with my essentially setting a vision and making sure that vision was aligned, and then essentially offering them to absorb essentially opportunities. And there was one opportunity that felt right, and that was the moment essentially where I felt truly aligning both myself, the vision, and the universe, right? I mean, and with that full alignment, trust is possible. And when we present to peers, customers, to people we lead, from that state where we are aligned, we know where we go, and we have trust from that place, and we are connected to others by having essentially, in my case, a business idea that I can work for, and is a catalyst for my relationship with others, then ultimately is what or I would describe embodiment. And that's essentially me entering in resonance with my vision and having a vehicle, a catalyst essentially, to interact with people and to have people essentially coming into that vision. So no, to speak about more concrete terms, it means that essentially when I'm talking about my business ID, which is in low latency networking and operation, I'm first of all obviously working days and nights on building knowledge on that, but not anymore because I want to control and force my path to success, but just because that topic is calling. People, when they discuss it with me, when I pitch essentially co-founders to recruit, when I team members, right? I mean, for the teams I'm building, when I pitch customers, when I pitch investors, because I'm raising 15 to they resonate essentially with that vision. Very often when I'm asked what makes difference between projects that get funding, finance, and projects that don't, it often boils down to that. Obviously, there's many other points to take into factor, but it often boils down to that. And I think that today we've been unpacking a lot of pieces of the puzzle to get there, right? I mean, because unfortunately, it's not that anyone can wake up, and say, I want everything to be aligned for me. I want everything to work well, and it will materialize. Obviously, it's very important, right? I mean, to verbalize it, right? I mean, but it goes through a much more profound transformation that, as we have, right? It's a that in my case started at the very least 9 months ago, and that very much accelerated and fantastic so far. But I'm sure there's still many others to come in the way, many other evolution, and I'm just so grateful that I can walk through essentially those future steps and evolutions
Yeah.
with into what nowadays what felt very and unsolved now feels like any challenge essentially is not a big on that because ultimately there's a lot of for
Yes.
what's coming. So thank you very much for that, Dagmara.
Thank you very much, Flora. And indeed, this is this deep sense of trust, knowing, certainty, confidence from inside. That's different than being perceived as confident, isn't it? And this is such a important element for any success, right? And that's what will be guiding you now. And to what you said at the end, I know it's always like complexity. How do we explain that energy and stuff? And for me, is like stepping into your authentic self, let's say, and aligning yourself from within. It's landing always to the third layers of who we are, right? So we are minds, we have a body, but we emanate energy. Every of us emanates energy. And that energy, first of all, is the main communicator, right? It's how we feel with other people. There are so many different techniques in how to communicate better. Yes, they are valid, but the 97 or something percent is actually subconsciously communicated through energy, right? So if we don't know how to navigate that space and we are in constant disalignment, right? I mean, we can't create a psychological safety and the space that we truly want. So we don't know how to navigate. But the second you were explaining, and I thank you for that, is the bigger picture, right? We are surrounded by a quantum field. We call it universe, we call it quantum field. It's electromagnetic field because everything is energy, is discovery of quantum physics. And then it depends which belief system you are, right? Spiritual or more science based. But that's a fact that we are in a constant co-creation. And the more we know how to do it, the more synchronicities happen in our life, the faster we, come. And as you say, by living that vision means embodying that vision, right? Which is there. You are in resonance. You are in resonance to whoever needs to, come to help you realize it, and resonance with who is your client actually. So that's such an important mechanism, not only for entrepreneurs, but thinking about you now as an entrepreneur in clients creation process, in opportunities creation process, because that's this magnetic presence that draws people towards. And it's exactly the same for any executive and CEO in any business, because we want to attract the right top talents. And you're going to US also for that. Right? And I think concluding that, I see that listening to you, shifting you to another frequency, right? We call it a timeline in quantum leaping, because it was, right? Shifting you from a timeline, we can call it, which was successful on its own, right? But where you now pivoted to such more aligned and much more meaningful and impactful journey for yourself, and with a lot of trust and clarity. And hey, that's important. Bringing that all to end, Florent, two last questions for you. What would you say to those that maybe listen today and say, "Wow, that's an interesting story that Florence said, but it might not work for me." Or let me think, maybe this not whatever. It may be many hesitations for taking such a journey. What would you say to those?
Well, ultimately, a year ago, I was perceiving myself as successful, but everything was effort and pain on that journey. As of today, everything that I was doing before, recruiting top talent, leading essentially large teams, achieving across organization, making that known, feels natural, right? I mean, and I don't have a second thought, which means that I've freed so much mental bandwidth to focus, right, on what truly is important for my business. I didn't believe and I didn't seek for transformation at the beginning when I was looking for Dagmara. I was willing to solve a very concrete problem, which was a performance problem within. And ultimately, in that I discovered that the most important was trust. That essentially I'm having at the end of the process is very different from the trust I had at the beginning. At the beginning, the most important trust is to trust to get started. The trust to essentially that something positive might come of trying something different. That's the start of trust, the trust at the beginning. And the trust at the end ended up to be a trust that there's a future for me that is inevitable, and that it will come. So, because I thought I had nothing to lay at trying something different, I received dividends of it today that I would have never, tried to foresee and expect it, right? I mean, so obviously from today, from where I am today, it's easier for me to tell you to trust because that's no what I perceive key success. But fundamentally, many of you know that you have nothing to lose trying new things to get your day-to-day a little bit better, right? I mean, whether you're seeking to make your team more performant, whether you're seeking for yourself to at a point of time in your career where you feel you're stagnated, or whether you think essentially that there's something not right and that you are at a already, and that you know you have to take a decision, but you don't know yet to go about it, right? I can just tell you that it's a journey of self-discovery. It's a journey, your horizon. It's a journey that is personal to you. And it's a journey on which you need guidance. Because as much as we don't know everything and and essentially we need that humility to realize also that actually to better work towards our goal, whatever that goal is, essentially, um, actually using the collective strengths and working with others is actually the bit to progress faster towards our goal. So that's what.
Thank you very much, Florent. Thank you very much. So grateful. And the last question goes to you in your next steps on your mission. I know you're excited to go now to the Silicon Valley. Anything that you want to say about this next steps? And maybe, thinking that many people listen to us, anybody you would love to receive a phone call from?
Yeah. So
Who might be listening to us here?
So very short, essentially, we are building the artificial intelligence fabric. As of today, there's many data centers that are built through in Europe, and there's very little expertise on how to operate very low latency networking, right? I mean, to power those AI fabrics. What I'm doing is I'm embarking into a vision of taking best of breed talents from the Silicon Valley that have been operating essentially those network at scales, but that are limited working for big corporations and want essentially to finally use all of their skills and knowledge to build something essentially for their own, right? I mean, have the full ownership of their architectures and and essentially make a big impact. And Europe is that blank page, right? I mean, for experience essentially individual, to be able to shape it, right? I mean, and define the standards of that industry. It's in the very early days, and we will embark also in a journey with a lot of European partners. So we will partners with 3 to 5 companies for which we have capital to develop, right? And because there's also a lot of talents on operating network in Europe, and we do believe that there's a very good ecosystem of skilled network engineers that have built very specific competencies in network operating systems, in network data planes, and that need more access to capital and fuel to be able to serve very large AI European customers. And what we will offer them is to partners with us and with our US team in order to be building those AI fabrics. Because as we were speaking few minutes, our power is that is when we get as a collective, we are stronger, right? I mean, and we are able to add all of those competencies together, and by adding all of those competencies, we multiply the value we can generate. Our industry is at the very, very beginning of the transformation. I've worked for one of the biggest telecom companies in the world, Deutsche Telekom, for many, many. And I can say to all of my in the network and telecom industry, we are moving away. We are moving away from general purpose network to networks that will be very specific to workloads, essentially, such as the artificial intelligence workload I was working.
I love the change maker narrative, right? Reshaping the industry. And I guess those that are participating, right, or co-creating this industry, this is a call for connection, right? And we'll put your link of LinkedIn in the episode description. So that's, I think, the easiest way how, if you're interested, to reach out to Florent. And let's see. And you are moving soon to US. So whoever listening to us might be interested to connect. Florent, thank you very, very much for this conversation. And, it was a pleasure not only to, of course, work with you. I know it's not the end. We know that too. But also to have this conversation today here with you. And, for this a very detailed and pragmatic sharing how it went, including what were the difficult parts, because that's important to. And I wish you, of course, for this next mini chapter, big chapter, whichever you want to call it, the breakthrough chapter, because we have many of those. Really, all the best in US, and that this vision is coming to 3D, because that's what's going now to happen in co-creation with others. So thank you very much, and obviously be in touch.
Thank you very much.
And for all the listeners today, I hope that you're walking with a lot of inspiration and clarity on what really might put you on a different trajectory in your career and with your leadership and with your business. So if you are in this point like Florent a couple of months back, where you start to feel like, I can't move forward, take it as an invitation to something so much greater, and take that call when you see someone offering you. I see you next week and next time, and I'm wishing you a fantastic time.